Here's how you can add perfect grid lines to your logos in Illustrator. Creating grid lines for your logo is very important as it ensures all the shapes and angles inside the logo are all aligned. To do this in Illustrator, the best way is to use the Logo Grid Generator tool. Inside Akrivi Gridit, we have Base Grid Generator, Logo Grid Generator, and Clear Space Grid Generator. For this example, of course, we're going to be using Logo Grid Generator. And we're just going to open the Preferences tab, and we're going to focus on the grid line sensitivity. Before I use this, I'm going to make sure my outlines and grid lines only are selected. Now I'm going to select the logo and I'm just going to hit generate. So you can see all of the grid lines have been generated. We have diagonal grid lines and horizontal grid lines. For this example, there's no straight vertical grid line, so we don't have that. And depending on your preference of the type of grid lines you want to appear, what you can do is undo the grid, and then we can reduce the sensitivity to 0. So 1 and 0 are the best sensitivities for like simple geometric logos. If we reduce it to 0 and we generate, you can see there are a lot less grid lines based from the diagonal angles. So this just focuses on 45-degree angles and just straight lines, such as the straight horizontal lines you're seeing in this logo example. Now with this example, you can see there's probably only just 2 lines, which is these 2 horizontal lines over here. However, if we just select the logo and we click generate, you can see the grid lines are created for these horizontal lines. But in some cases, you would want a grid line for this side of the circle here, and also above there and below there, and also in there. So basically on every end of the curve, you would want a grid line. This can be done by just increasing the grid line sensitivity to 2. So grid line sensitivity at the level of 2 adds grid lines to the edges of the circles. So I'm going to select the logo and I'm going to hit generate. And you can now see that there are grid lines horizontal at the bottom of the circle, at the top, and also on the left side. And also we have a grid line over there. And now for this example, we have a full logo which includes a Logomark and a Logotype. Creating grid lines for a word mark or a Logotype is a lot longer because you have to align every letter. However, with Gridit, Logo Grid Generator, you can simply do the same thing. If we just select the logo and let's keep the sensitivity to 1, then you can see this outcome. We have all our grid lines, and you can see we also have our potential errors, which are worth checking out. They're not always errors, but you can see we have our grid lines. For word marks, another thing that you can do is you can reduce the grid line sensitivity, so there are fewer lines appearing based on the tighter angles. So if we reduce that to 0 and we generate, you can see this is a lot cleaner than the previous, and there is almost no changes that need to be done. Actually, I think it's pretty perfect, but there are no changes that need to be done. So when creating a grid for a logo known as a construction grid to show shapes that were used within a logo, majority of designers want to include these circular shapes, also known as circular trajectories. So to do this, we can just simply select the logo and of course select circular trajectories. Now that's on, if we hit generate, you can see the circular grids have now been added along with the vertical and diagonal grid lines within the logo. So circular trajectories is the grid line version for circular shapes, just finishing and completing any circles that were used within the logo. If you want to speed up your brand identity workflow, Akrivi Studio lets you generate logo grids, bento grids, and full brand guidelines in seconds. You can start generating for free with a 3-day trial. The link is in the description.